Hola, bona tarda a tothom. Moltes gràcies a tothom per haver vingut. Gràcies, evidentment, a John Lanchester per participar d'aquestes converses a la Pedrera. Faré una breu introducció i després començarem aquesta xerrada. John Lanchester va néixer a Hamburg, va créixer a Calcuta, Rangoon, Brunei i Hong Kong. Es va educar a Oxford, es va casar a Nevada, viu a Londres. És col·laborador habitual de The Observer com a crític literari, com a cronista de futbol i a la secció de gastronomia. I potser per tot això veu les coses des d'un altre punt de vista o des de molts punts de vista. És a dir, que la majoria de nosaltres, o molts de nosaltres, tenim la sensació que pertanyem a un lloc i que per això aquell lloc, de qualque manera, també ens pertany a nosaltres. Però ell sap perfectament que no és així. Sap perfectament que quan diem que una casa és nostra, que és casa nostra, que és la nostra llar, no és exactament així, i menys des que existeixen les hipoteques. En tot cas, som nosaltres els que pertanyem a les entitats bancàries. A la novel·la Capital explica la història d'un carrer, Pepys Road, on els veïns veuen com casa seva, que continua sent la mateixa casa de sempre. Aquesta casa va revaloritzant-se al mateix temps que revaloritza el barri on viuen fins que esclata la crisi de l'any 2008. Lanchester va investigar sobre l'economia, que té un llenguatge críptic, té un llenguatge eufemístic, perquè la majoria de nosaltres no entenguem de què va quan parlen d'economia, només ho puguin entendre els experts. I ell investiga aquell llenguatge i ens l'explica en 2 llibres, ¿Por qué todo el mundo debe a todo el mundo y nadie puede pagar? Y cómo hablar del dinero. A la novel·la el senyor Phillips relata la història d'un home gris, i a no dir, a qui li fan fora de la feina, i com en el cas de Capital explica com aquestes grans decisions mundials afecten a l'individu, com ens afecten a cadascun de nosaltres. Sembla que siguin coses en majúscules que no ens afectin, però sempre ens afecten. Lanchester també ha escrit la novel·la gastronòmica El refinament del gust, va guanyar el Premi Llibreter amb El port de les aromes, és autor de novel·la familiar i aquest gener que ve publicarà The Wall, de la qual en parlarem més endavant. Però abans vull parlar de 3 eixos que crec que són fonamentals. El primer és els diners. Com és possible que els diners, que són una cosa que determinen la nostra vida, que determinen el nostre paper en la societat, que de fet determinen fins i tot la societat, sigui un tema que se'n parli tan poc, se'n parli d'una manera tan poc directa, no només en el nostre dia a dia, sinó també a les novel·les, se parla molt poc dels diners. Ell ho fa. El segon tema que vull tractar, o el segon eix, és el tema de la família, perquè, esclar, qui parla de la pròpia família és qui està donant la versió oficial, serà l'oficial que romandrà sempre, serà la versió que quedarà, encara que no sigui veritat, però serà la versió bona, perquè ens creiem tot allò que està per escrit. I finalment, el tercer eix, que engloba els 2 anteriors, és el tema de la veritat. Tant en el cas dels diners, que és una cosa externa i és una cosa mundial, com en el cas de la família, que és una cosa íntima i personal, en els 2 casos no se'ns explica mai tota la veritat. I per què no se'ns explica tota la veritat? Perquè ens volen protegir o perquè ens volen enganyar. És a dir, si sapiguéssim com funciona la macroeconomia i sapiguéssim com funcionen les famílies, la majoria de nosaltres sortiríem corrents i no voldríem saber res més. Llavors, per començar parlant d'això, m'agradaria agafar 2 imatges, no sé si són embrionàries, apareixen a la seva obra, i la primera d'aquestes imatges és la del seu pare, que treballava en un banc i que, malgrat fer-ho, no parlava mai de diners, no volia parlar mai de diners. Llavors, la primera pregunta seria, quan més sabem sobre un tema, més l'ocultam?
Well, I don't know if there's a general rule about that. Firstly, I should say thank you everyone for coming out on such a bitterly cold night. I was really looking forward to Barcelona and I didn't know how high a risk I was running of dying of hypothermia. So I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight when you could just stay at home and rewatch the highlights of the Classico from last night over and over again. I think the particular case of my father, I mean, it was strange. He did work for a bank. but he found it almost impossible to talk about money personally. I think it was partly because he was a very reluctant banker. He was sort of slightly forced into doing it by his own father. And I think partly there's a particular thing about money. I think in a way we don't want to think about it. I think we have a sort of fairly deep instinct to avoid the subject. And I think perhaps because there's a deep instinct that money is actually the opposite of quite a lot of things about the way life should be lived. It contradicts lots of other values. It contradicts lots of other things that we believe in and care about and do with our lives. It contradicts family. It contradicts love. It can contradict the idea of doing your work for its own sake. So I think actually our resistance to thinking too much about money is actually, in a way, that's because the grain of our nature resists it. And I think it's quite an interesting instinct, and I think it actually makes people who are willing to just sit down and think about money all the time. It's one of the reasons they're unusual.
Una altra, la segona imatge de la qual parlava abans seria també, surt el seu pare, i és la primera vegada que van junts que vostè va a un caixer automàtic i és un nen en aquell moment i es pregunta què passaria si els caixers automàtics deixessin de donar diners. No? I en aquell moment sent molta por i té una intuïció bastant certera, té una manera de veure les coses que després s'ha complert de qualque manera. M'agradaria o sigui, què li sembla ara que tot es paga amb el telèfon mòbil, que qualsevol transacció es pot fer sense tenir diners, de fet, que estem regalant les nostres dades biomètriques, l'iris dels ulls, estem regalant el reconeixement facial, les empremtes digitals, estem regalant tot això sense demanar res a canvi, només perquè ens diuen que la nostra vida serà més fàcil si ho fem. I també, vostè que va criar-se a Hong Kong, com viu aquesta implantació del carnet del bon ciutadà que al final el que fa és controlar a tothom i mantenir a tothom dins uns paràmetres del que és correcte i del que no és.
Well, I think there's something really, really frightening about the idea of the citizen score that the Chinese government is developing. It's a really dark and dystopian idea that you're kind of permanently monitored as a productive citizen, as a family member, as a member of society, and that has all kinds of direct practical consequences about your work and about availability to get credit, about schooling, housing, your family circumstances. It's a terrifying idea. I mean, one of the things that's particularly interesting about China at the moment is that if you talk to people with an interest in things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, where we're starting to have debates. We're a bit late, but we're starting to have debates about, the consequences of, say, things like self-driving cars. Well, on the one hand, you think, well, maybe that would be very useful for people who don't have access to transport, things like that. But at the same time, we've completely invented away actually the main category of work for lots of people. I tried to look up the numbers on this, and nobody seems to have them. But the best guess is in the United States, and I think 3 million people, 3 million workers, and the workforce there's about 150 million. So that's whatever it is. That's 2% of the workforce. That's their only skill. They drive for a living. And those jobs would instantly disappear. What that world would look like, where instead of millions of people earning a living, you have 1 or 2 companies controlling all the income and revenue, is a sort of dark and strange sort of hyper-capitalist thing, which we are starting to think about it. But in China, they're not thinking about it. They're just forging ahead. And you already have things like, I've heard about this from people working in the area, factory workers being monitored with devices that monitor their every movement. not just, rough figures of productivity, but literally their every movement, that track their eye movement, as well as obviously things like how often they go to the bathroom and the speed with which they move around the factory and things like that. So I think, the China is offering us a glimpse of a society in which the trends in technology are scrolled forwards, but there are no brakes at all on it. And that's where you do get things like the citizen score, which is like a sort of Facebook reputationalized idea that actually has, catastrophic consequences for your whole being. Mind you, Facebook has quite toxic consequences. If you have teenagers in school and there's a big culture of Facebook in the school, that is already quite close to a kind of totalitarian institution, because you can't get away from it. The old institution of school, when the day for you have a terrible, terrible day at school, and the door closes when you get home, and it's it. That's it. It's finished. The bad part of your day is over. You're home and you're safe. And now, for lots and lots of children, that's when the bad thing begins, because that's when the social media starts to impinge on your life. That's when the bullying starts. That's when the gangs and the cliques start to form. And that really is a new thing in human history, really, this thing that, that last frontier of privacy when the door closes. Not only does the frontier not exist, it's often when actually things get worse.
Hi ha un altre tema, que és el tema de la responsabilitat, perquè el tema de la responsabilitat parteix, per exemple, quan la borsa mundial funciona a través d'uns algoritmes que poden ser imprevisibles per als éssers humans, són tan ràpids que moltes vegades no els acabem d'entendre. Llavors, si aquests algoritmes provoquen un caos, com per exemple la crisi del 2008, a qui li hem de demanar responsabilitats? És a dir, si tornés a haver una crisi com aquella, que jo crec que encara no ha acabat, però en fi, si tornés a haver un esclat com aquell, això afectaria realment a les grans corporacions o només afectaria a la societat?
I think, let me give you an example of the thing about algorithms being out of control. There was a famous thing called the flash crash in October 2010, when there was this very dramatic movement in US share prices, and $1 trillion disappeared in the stock market and then came back, all in less time than an episode of The Simpsons. It happened in 20 minutes. And that was widely reported at the time, but there's a less well-known one happened, it's 4 years ago this month, October 2014, and it was in the US Treasury market. That's the debt market of US government debt, and that's the biggest and most liquid market in the world, because the US government is never going to default on its debts because it can print its own money. So it's completely safe, and there are buyers. When you have a 100th of a percentage point move, there are buyers and sellers on every price point, because it's a huge, biggest, most studied, most transparent financial market in the world, in the history of the world. And 4 years ago, you had this thing where the market suddenly moved, and the yield and price are linked. It went from 1.8 to 2.36% in a few seconds, which might not sound like a big deal, but because it's such a colossal market and there are so many participants in it, that was actually what was called a 7 to 8 sigma event, which means in terms of mathematical probability, it's not supposed to happen except something like every 3 billion years. So you have this, and what that means in the language of plain common sense is it's impossible. It can't happen. And yet it did. You had this 3 billion year event, and then it immediately recovered. And there was a fascinating report about it. The US Treasury, they convened a big conference. It happened over a weekend, long weekend, in a hotel in Washington, Friday to Monday. And they had the Treasury, they had the Federal Reserve, they had the banks, they had central banks from around the world, including from here. They had academics who study the market, and they had traders who participated in the market. And they get together Friday to Monday to come up, with an explanation of what happened. And the conclusion was, there was no agreement. So in other words, you have the most spectacular, sharp movement in the biggest financial market in the world, and nobody knows why, except it's something to do with algorithms. It was somehow algorithmically induced. So I suppose I come back to you with a question. I mean, I think what happens is we have a mental. It's partly to do with the word market, that we have a mental image of a market. A market is the boccheria, and there's people selling things and there's people buying things, and it's in a kind of, there's an agreed space where it happens, and there are an agreed set of rules about how it should happen. And modern financial markets are not like that. They're computers trading with each other in not tenths or hundredths or thousandths of a second, but in millionths of a second. And there is that idea that there's some adult supervision, there's some grown-up presiding over it, isn't true. There is no central agency or authority. So I think the idea of, who would pick up the consequences, it's almost two levels of abstraction removed from what's happening, because what's happening is global and it's instantaneous and it's completely without supervision. So we really don't know. I'd thought it's quite likely to go up and blow wrong. I mean, does that sound safe to anyone? It doesn't sound safe to me. It's quite likely to blow up and go wrong with really serious consequences, and we don't know what those consequences would look like.
És vera que parlàvem abans dels cotxes automàtics i parlàvem també ara de les xarxes socials, que recuperarem més endavant, però sí que quan les màquines, quan es parla de singularitat tecnològica, que les màquines tindran un llenguatge incomprensible per als humans, sembla una cosa com a de ciència-ficció, que hagin de passar molts anys perquè això arribi, però de qualque manera ja està aquí, en el sentit que tenen un llenguatge molt més eficient que el llenguatge humà. El llenguatge humà, la humanitat existeix gràcies al temps, no? El temps és el que fa les civilitzacions, el temps és el que fa la cultura, el temps és el que fa les tradicions, el temps és el que dona temps per reflexionar sobre un mateix, i a més, la comunicació entre els éssers humans precisament necessita d'un temps, que és el temps d'aproximació a l'altre, ja sigui a través de les formalitats, ja sigui a través de la seducció, etc. Aquell llenguatge és un llenguatge poc eficient per les màquines que necessiten aconseguir un producte o aconseguir algun resultat immediatament, només amb un clic. Llavors, esclar, nosaltres estem adaptant una mica aquest llenguatge de les màquines a les nostres pròpies vides i ens estem acostumant a aconseguir les coses només amb un clic. Això es veu claríssimament a les xarxes socials, volem la satisfacció immediata. Llavors, com que no hi ha aquesta reflexió i aquest impuls de dir les coses, estem arribant a un punt en què fins i tot la política s'està expressant a través de les xarxes socials. Llavors, la meva pregunta seria: què és més populista? El polític que utilitza aquestes xarxes per intentar arribar al màxim de gent possible a través d'impulsos, sense el filtre de la veracitat d'allò que està dient? És més populista la xarxa social en si, el mitjà? O són populistes els mitjans tradicionals que es fan ressò d'aquestes xarxes socials per fer informació barata, no contrastada, no contextualitzada i, per tant, que no és realment notícia?
I think that traditional media is making a big mistake if it chases social media. I think that they're very, they perform very different functions. I think someone like Trump understands he's shown a kind of complete, presumably it's intuitive, mastery of the rules of how social media works. And truth doesn't really matter on social media. Generating traction, generating virality, generating attention and heat, and fostering resentment, fostering wedge issues, things like that work. Twitter in particular is incredibly effective for that. It's not a very good medium at telling the truth. And I think when the nation state starts to kind of fight back against some of the chaotic nature of the internet and social media and those forces, I think some of the importance of the gatekeeping roles about veracity and truth will recover. Because I think one of the things that newspapers do, even if you don't agree with them, is that they provide a kind of forum where they're like the Greek agora. They're where things get argued about. They're a space for not agreement, but they're a space for sort of where things get voiced and said and debated. And I think that function's incredibly important. And I think chasing clicks and just using, you don't need someone to report on Trump's tweets. Every time I see, having worked in journalism, every time I see a story that refers to Twitter, I know someone's being lazy, because anyone can find that for themselves anyway. I remember the footballer Wayne Rooney once tweeted, I had a sudden revelation about social media when I saw Wayne Rooney tweeted when he had a hair transplant. They have those plugs put in their hair. And when he had it done, he tweeted a photo of his own head. I haven't had that done, by the way, in case you hadn't realised. And it was really, I remember seeing it on Twitter, and I think it was really interesting because our tabloid newspapers would have paid £50,000, £100,000 for that exclusive photo. And he'd just given it away, to his 5 million followers. And I remember thinking, wow, the rules have suddenly changed. What they do, what those journalists do, has just been rewritten, because you can't do that thing of just saying it was on Twitter, because all your readers already have that for free, and they know it. And I think the traditional media has been curiously slow to realise that we don't need them to do that. We can do that for ourselves. There are these other democratically vital roles for them to play, and it's time for them to sort of assume more responsibility.
Sí, però és veritat que aquests mitjans tradicionals com a mínim servien de filtre de qualque manera, tradicionalment, no estic dient en els nostres dies, i ara aquest filtre s'ha acabat, no? És a dir, que ahir veiem com Jair Bolsonaro guanyava les eleccions a Brasil, s'incorpora a la llista inquietant, no? de presidents com Trump, Putin, Salvini, Orbán. No sé fins a quin punt aquestes xarxes hi tenen a veure, i no sé tampoc fins a quin punt, per exemple, el Brexit hauria estat possible sense les xarxes socials. És a dir, fins a quin punt això canvia les coses o realment és més anecdòtic que definitiu. No ho sé.
I don't know enough about Bolsonaro. Someone this morning actually said, and I misheard, said, what do you think about the Bolsonaro tragedy? And I thought he said the Barcelona tragedy. And I thought, but you won 5-1. And then he explained. But I think there's a Nigerian-American writer called Teju Cole, very good writer. And at one point we both used to work for the New York Times magazine, and I met him. And I know he used to use Twitter very effectively. He used to do things like just tweeting news reports from Nigeria. It was really surprising and startling, kind of artistic, political use of Twitter. And then he just completely stopped. And met him just over a year ago and said, "You were brilliant at Twitter. What happened?" And he said, "Well, I just realised that without Twitter, Trump would have been elected, and I couldn't bear to do it anymore." And I must admit that really landed with me. And I used to use Twitter, and I've stopped now because of that. Because I think that is true. I'm not sure about Brexit, because I think that a lot of those polarizations are already there. But definitely, no Twitter equals no Trump. Because of this, because it's giving a megaphone to someone to do the thing that Hitler famously said. If you're going to tell a big lie, and Trump has an instinctive understanding of just the power of falsehoods, and that if you keep repeating enough of them, it just doesn't matter. And on that simple point, in the old days, that would have come through filters, like you've been watching a news report that said Trump says so and so, it's demonstrably untrue in the following ways, or what the New York Times does, basically has Trump lie of the day. but now it comes completely unmediated. And because the news is always kind of reporting the last thing he said, it does give the ability to completely create a kind of parallel reality of untruth. You know, that the untruths define what people are talking about. And I do think that's new. I think there were lots of lies and mistakes and also just plain ignorance in the Brexit thing. But I think the kind of fault line was there already. And curiously, oddly enough, because people who voted for Brexit tend to be older, they're actually less social media users. So that's an odd case there. Mm-hmm. But I do think it has been a very powerful tool for fomenting division, for making people hate each other more.
El Brexit és un bon tema literari, i si és un bon tema literari, a partir de quin moment se'n pot parlar, se'n pot escriure, agafant la distància adequada, perquè vostè ha escrit que cada època és més durament jutjada per als qui venen just després.
Well, my next novel, coming out next year, is set in an island nation entirely surrounded by a 5-metre high concrete wall. So you can probably guess where I got the idea for that. I think it's very difficult to know how long it takes for people to process things. It's very difficult to know how long it takes before you sort of know what something means. And I think there's something particularly strange about Brexit is that if Theresa May was sitting here right now, feel free to boo. She couldn't tell you what Brexit means come March the 29th, which is when it's happening. I mean, there's something very strange about the fact that on oath, the people running it could not tell you the nature of the deal, the outcome we'll have in 5 months' time. It's incredibly strange that, and it's a sort of prolonged period of kind of opacity and uncertainty. That's been one of the strangest things about living through it. I mean, lots of depressing things about the country being divided and people disliking each other, and people like me who weren't born in Britain suddenly realising that lots of your fellow countrymen, wish you weren't there. And so there's lots of strange, dark things to it. But just also, it's so odd, this thing about we're 2.5 years into talking about it, and no one knows actually what it is. I've never lived through anything quite like that. And I think probably it's to do with just simple incompetence, that the people behind it had no idea about the plan, no idea what the outcome. May set up various stupid and arbitrary rules about what was going to happen that made it impossible. But it's difficult to even begin processing it because it hasn't happened.
En aquest sentit, tornem al tema de la veritat, perquè no sé si és perquè les xarxes apel·len a les emocions, però passa una mica el mateix que passa amb les famílies, no? Que no volem saber la veritat realment, perquè no volem deixar de creure en allò que hem cregut sempre. Si hem estimat els nostres pares, de sobte no volem que ens replantegin qui eren els nostres pares, i de la mateixa manera, si tenim uns ideals o tenim una manera de veure el món, no volem que de sobte vengui algú i ens digui escolta, aquest plantejament és erroni i t'estàs equivocant. No? Ens estimem més continuar creient en allò i en aquelles persones a qui sempre havíem cregut, defensar la nostra gent abans que reconèixer que ens poden haver enganyat o que les coses no eren com nosaltres ens pensàvem. I si vol podem anar cap a la família, perquè això és com quan comences a preguntar-te sobre la pròpia família, igual que quan fas periodisme, que comences a preguntar-te sobre la veritat de les coses, en el fons estàs anant en contra d'una cosa que s'està intentant ocultar, i per tant te posa en una situació incòmoda, però a més posa en una situació incòmoda també a la gent que t'envolta. No sé si és el seu cas.
It was. I mean, I think the first thing for me, the first important thing when I started writing about my parents, I should explain. I found out after my mother died that my mother had taken her sister's identity. My mother had been a nun. She'd been a missionary in India. She was Irish. She'd been a missionary in India for many years. And then when she came out and she left the convent, she took her sister's identity in order to make 10 years disappear off her life, in order to seem 10 years younger. And so all her documents, including my birth certificate and things like that, were actually my aunt, my mother's much younger sister. And I only found out after she died, and I wanted to kind of find out what had happened. And the first thing I thought was that I would find the truth and tell the truth. And then I realized that was, maybe it's because of being an only child, that I thought there was, one perspective from which you can narrate a family story. And you can get all the information and then tell the truth. And family life doesn't work like that. My mother was one of 8. There were 8 siblings. And I soon realized that, not only did they remember specifics differently, and not only did they remember who said what and when it happened and who it happened to, but even if you had full agreement on everything, they would still disagree about the meaning. So someone would remember, somebody coming home from school in triumph, having got A's in their exams, and the parents being really happy. And then another sibling would remember, says, no, that's not what happened at all. She came in saying, I got 8 A's and everything, and my father just said, close the door, there's a draft. And it was this sort of terrible the terrible moment of emotional violence. So you have that strange thing that even full agreement on everything, still the kind of meaning and emotional context could be just opposite. And so I realized that actually there wasn't a single version of the truth to tell. I had to tell somebody's story. So I stuck to telling my mother. So I thought that was the only one I could kind of get access to. And interestingly, in the family, because my mother really hated her mother, my grandmother. They didn't get on. They didn't like each other. My mother was a very unfrightened person, but she was frightened of her mother. And so that's the perspective from which I wrote it. But some other members of the family remembered her in later life as this sort of sweet, gentle, rather loving old lady who had no ill will in her at all. Well, my mother's version of her was boiling with ill will. And so I learned a lesson like that you just have to. You can tell a version, but it's not like you get a sort of agreed overall, a kind of 3D view from above. But the other thing I found was that, so the various family secrets emerge, as family secrets will. And when I was telling the story, I had to think about what to put in and what not to put in. I decided to be very careful about lots of things. I'm very careful about my cousins, I've got as I said, there were 8 of them, so I've got lots of first cousins in my generation in Ireland. So I was very careful about them, and tried to be respectful of the older generation. But of my mother, 5 sisters became nuns, and all of them left the convent. And I had to tell the story, because my mother was one of them. So I was saying things that people didn't want to be said, and the way I eventually landed on a kind of principle for myself, which is, or to put it differently, the way I feel I could account for it is, I feel I can defend every sentence in that book, every sentence in it. I thought very carefully about what I put in and what I didn't put in. So I can defend every sentence in the book, but I can't defend having written the book at all. The basic impulse to write the book, I did that because I wanted to. And having made that decision, I was then very, very careful. But I felt I needed to tell the story to make sense of it. And it's not as a great gift to the world at large. I just needed to understand it for myself. And I found it helpful to have that distinction, what you're actually doing for yourself and what you're doing to be careful about the consequences in the world around you.
Quan escrius sobre la pròpia família, també descobreixes que, clar, els teus pares hi eren abans que tu i no eren pares, els teus avis també hi eren abans de ser pares i de ser avis, o sigui, per tu sempre hi han estat, però en canvi tu no hi has estat sempre per ells. I a més, descobreixes també que una família és com una espècie de sistema de miralls en el qual els uns es veuen reflectits en els altres i que tu et pensaves que t'assemblaves a qualcú, no? O que t'assemblaves a un d'ells, o que volies semblar-te a un d'ells, i de sobte t'adones que no, que t'assembles a d'altres que no t'agraden tant, potser, no? O veus les manies, o veus les pors, o veus tot això, no? I de sobte, a més d'aquest sistema, que és el sistema de la família, els veus també com a persones individuals. Tu també en parles d'això.
I think that's one of the strange things that happens as you get older, that your parents are these monoliths whose prime identity is your parents, and they're like these pillars, you know, they're permanent, they're just there. And then you realise, I noticed looking around, it tends to happen to people in their 30s, and then it really kicks in if they become parents themselves. You suddenly are living through things that your parents lived through, and the story seems very different. And one of the other things that I realised when I was writing that book was that, again, you'll never write a version of your family that you can be certain you'll agree with in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. If you want to write about your family now, you are writing about your feelings and your views in this moment. And that, it does change, it's dynamic. And your understanding of your parents, just as your understanding of your own life, you know, changes and evolves over time. And so I think when we think about our families, in a way, we also have to give ourselves the permission to be wrong. You know, it's not static. It does change. It does evolve. I remember my father retired when he was because he hated his job, this bank job that his father encouraged him to do. He absolutely hated it, and he quit as early as he could. So he was 50. I remember him thinking, when he was retiring, I'm thinking, yeah, that's perfectly normal. Of course he's retired. He was 3 years younger than I am now. And so my understanding of that is completely different from what it was when I was, 18 and didn't know anything about adult life. It's one of the mysterious things. I also think that our personalities are a little less fixed than we think. I think we're encouraged to think of personality as a sort of monolithic structure, but actually I think it's more like a collection of themes. We're more like I know it's fashionable to talk about the narrative in terms of your own life, but I think we're almost more like poems as individuals. We have themes and motifs and things that kind of go one way and then go another. And it's why you quite often see people, obsessed with one thing and then turning sort of into the opposite. And I think that kind of, different motifs emerge at different points in our own personalities. I don't really believe in a completely fixed and continuous self.
No, i les relacions també van canviant al llarg de la vida. No tens la mateixa relació amb els teus pares sempre, van canviant. I és curiós veure com aquestes relacions també canvien. Però és curiós també que per què no volem saber-ho tot dels pares? Per què els pares no volen saber tot dels fills? Això és així, no volem saber tot, perquè sempre hi ha un punt que ens dona pudor, no? És a dir, fins aquí va bé, però no vull saber res més. Però en canvi sí que volem saber-ho tot de la nostra parella.
Do we? Do we want to know everything about ourselves? I'm not sure. I think Nietzsche said ignorance has as much structure as knowledge, and I think that's right. I think we negotiate a lot of life is about negotiating what you're quite careful not to know. And there's a famous line of T.S. Eliot about humankind cannot bear too much reality, and I think that's broadly speaking true. I think we can't bear too much reality. There's that fantastic thing in Proust. He talks about I often think about this because I'm very like this, unfortunately, that, I've always got really good intentions. I'm always going to reply to that email. I don't particularly want to go to my neighbour's child's christening, but but I should. I'll definitely go. But then my character forgets. So I'm a really great person. It's just my character's really terrible because my character forgets to reply to the email. Can't be bothered. He says, "Oh, whoops, we've already missed the christening." I should write a thank you note, but whoops, my character hasn't done it for me. I think there's a lot, even inside ourselves, of negotiating the gap between what we actually really are like and how we like to think of ourselves. And I think there's a lot with, in any relationship, there's a lot, in any and all relationships, there's a kind of complicated dance of how much you want to know and how little you can get away with knowing. But I think it's one of the things that we go to fiction for, is because in fiction you can have a complete, you can have a very complete engagement with the mystery of what other people are like. I think actually it's harder in real life.
Però també és veritat que quan saps la veritat t'has de responsabilitzar d'aquesta veritat. Fins que no la saps, jo no sabia res, no? Llavors no te'n fas responsable. Des del moment que saps allò, has de fer-te responsable de la situació. Això em fa pensar a Capital. Clar, a mi l'altre dia em varen fer veure, que jo no ho havia vist, que totes les novel·les que jo he publicat estan situades l'any 2007, just abans de la crisi oficial del 2008, i després que aquí es faria palesa sobretot als anys 2010 i 2011. Llavors, el 2007 ja hi havia totes les pistes, és a dir, ja hi era tot, perquè si no, perquè estic tan obsessionada amb aquell any, no? Però en canvi feien veure que no hi era. A Capital passa una mica el mateix. Tenim el carrer, tenim la gent que viu al carrer, la gent que ha viscut sempre allà i que ha vist com casa seva cada vegada és més valuosa només pel fet d'estar en aquell barri, el futbolista que lloga la casa allà, etc., el quiosquer, el senyor que té la botiga. O sigui, hi ha tot aquell carrer que viu tota sola, que té una espècie de microcosmos i després està a punt d'esclatar tot, però ningú sembla adonar-se'n. I quan tenen aquelles pistes una mica a prop, miren cap a una altra banda. Això serà sempre la nostra actitud?
I fear that's probably right. I mean, I do think one of the reasons I was so interested in that moment was because of this sense of obliviousness. That there was this thing that I felt was quite likely to happen, partly because I'd lived through a property crash before, and they're not that unusual. But there was one in Britain, we had one in the late 1980s, early 90s. And it was only like 15, 16 years before, but it was as if it was 160 years before. People behaved as if this thing was completely impossible. I think there is a deep impulse to obliviousness about, when things are going well, you think they'll go well forever. And you mentioned my father. One of my father's favourite sayings was, he said that all you need to be, it was a quotation, all you need to be an investment genius is a short memory and a rising market. And I think lots of people convinced themselves that they were they bought their house for this, it was worth that, therefore they were geniuses. And that's quite a powerful drug, the feeling that everything's going up and automatically becoming better. And I was really, really interested in that moment of kind of collective delusion. And I think it is linked to this thing about the fact that we don't want to know. We don't want to know too much of the reality of it. If you're living through something that's unsustainable, most of us most of the time prefer not to know until after it's happened. And they are the things that you alluded to. The thing I said before. We always are historically judged most harshly for the thing that we refuse to see. That's the thing that's right in front of our eyes, and we're kind of choosing to ignore it. And those are the things that, in historical retrospect, it'll always look astonishing that people manage to avert their gaze from.
No n'estic del tot segura que sigui així, perquè és vera que han passat 10 anys des d'aquella crisi i al contrari, estem fent exactament el mateix. No hem evolucionat gens, o tinc la sensació que econòmicament no hem evolucionat gens, no hem evolucionat de cap manera i mentalment tampoc, perquè podria tornar a passar perquè no hi ha hagut una millora en cap cas, al contrari, com a mínim aquí, i en aquell moment hi havia unes reserves econòmiques que ara no tenim. No? Llavors, si tornés a passar una altra vegada el que va passar el 2008, quin seria el resultat? No? És a dir, perquè seria molt més gros que aquella vegada, i aquella vegada ja es va parèixer que era una cosa molt bèstia. No? És a dir, els nostres sous, jo me'n record que ser mileurista, cobrar 1.000 euros en aquell moment era una cosa precària i ara tots volem cobrar com a mínim 1.000 euros. No? És a dir, en canvi, els lloguers, els preus de l'habitatge, les hipoteques, tot això continua sent inassequible per a les persones que vivim aquí. Llavors, no sé exactament què és el que m'ha après, quina lliçó m'ha après, i tampoc puc creure'm que més endavant es pugui fer una reflexió sobre tot això perquè no s'està fent ara tampoc.
Well, I think there was a terrible missed opportunity after the crash. I think there was all sorts of fundamental reform that needed to happen, and I think the injection of capital into the banking system, I think it was probably necessary because no one knows what that would have looked like, but that had to be accompanied by structural reform across the whole of finance. You had to completely change the rules for how everything worked. I think the Eurozone needed fundamental redesign, and there was an agreement after the end of the Second World War, a thing called Bretton Woods, that basically set us a set of rules for how capital would move across borders and things like that, and all that was scrapped. And I think we needed a completely new architecture. And I also think we needed a few senior bankers to go to jail. I think it would have been very helpful because it would have shown that there was genuine accountability and culpability. Instead, none of those things happened. Basically because the finance system won. They're rich, they're powerful, they're shameless about lobbying for their interests, and they got everything they wanted up from 2010 on. And the result was no reform, no real change, and a lot of the most dangerous, most fragile things are all still in place. And as you say, the difference this time is that there are no reserves. I'm not sure what interest rates were in Spain when the crisis hit. In the UK, they were 6%. And the thing about 6% is you have something to play with. They're now 0.5%. There's nothing to play with. And similarly, nobody has any savings. People are severely stretched after years of what we call austerity. And I think the answer is that, it must be true that if there was a repetition of a crisis like that, that the finance system couldn't pull off the same trick again. It must be true that we couldn't bail them all out and then have a return to, they say, oh, can we have everything back the same way again? But all of that are things that we needed to have done 10 years ago. And there's an old saying, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. But the fact is that our systems, we collectively did waste them. Partly, I think, because it's such an elite, it's difficult to exaggerate the extent to which there's a gap between the elite and everybody else with these things. It's not like we have any say in the rules of how finance and things are conducted. It's completely done in closed rooms. And Vanis Varoufakis, who I sometimes like, sometimes don't, but he did say, it is quite striking, that book he calls The Adults in the Room. And that's named after a moment when Larry Summers turns to him before they go into meeting and says, do you want to be one of the adults or not? And the adults meaning the people who go in and make all the real decisions and never talk about it. And I think there is a sense that the system is still run by those so-called adults.
Sobretot que fa l'efecte que moltes vegades les entitats bancàries, els éssers humans els hi fem nosa perquè som més un destorb que un guany que puguin fer, no? Perquè al final la macroeconomia, les grans inversions són molt més interessants de la que nosaltres puguem aportar com a petits individus, no? I en el cas de Capital es tracta d'un tema que és per mi essencial, que és el de la casa, el de la llar, no? El que deia al començament, que ens sentim que casa nostra és el nostre refugi, no? És allà on anem quan hem de passar la vida, no? És on vivim. Llavors, des del moment que tu no tens una casa, des del moment que t'atreuen a aquesta casa, que no te pertany, que allò està sobrevalorat o com a mínim no està pensat per les persones, sinó que està pensat per aquestes entitats bancàries o per aquestes grans corporacions o com el que sigui, moltes vegades et fa sentir molt desemparat, no? Perquè dius, llavors, qui està vetllant per nosaltres? No? És a dir, on ens podem refugiar, què podem fer sense aquest lloc on aixoplugar-nos?
And there's also a profound generational divide with that, that you know, there are lots of people who own their own home just purely by virtue of how old they are. If I were starting out as a writer now, there's not a chance in hell I would own my own house, or indeed be able to afford to live in London. And it's just, you know, an accident of date of birth that I can. And that's a really quite profound divide in society. That you have it across the developed world. In effect, you have two different versions of the social contract. You have quite a comfortable life with relatively generous benefits and healthcare and things like that, you know, provided by the state for people who were lucky to be born before a certain date, and, you know, relatively secure employment and things like that. And then a younger generation born into much more precarious circumstances who don't have any of those guaranteed benefits and don't have that relationship with a kind of safety net at all. And some of the numbers are really shocking. The country for which I've seen data is Italy, and I think I can't remember the cutoff. I think the cutoff was people over 60 and under 30, and the people over 60 received across their lifetime projected 2.5 times the level of benefits from the state, and pay 40% as much as people under 30 are projected to. And in effect, what that means is you're giving out different versions of the contract that society offers its citizens, and home ownership is part of it, but it's by no means the only one. And you have this strange sense that we're living in parallel societies at the same time.
Hi ha esperança?
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, there's a curious thing, is that, you know, Karl Marx was 200 years old, 200 years old earlier this year, and people have been predicting the death of capitalism ever since Marx started writing. And capitalism has survived and thrived and is now the dominant, you know, inarguably the dominant global system because of its capacity to adapt. It keeps changing, it keeps mutating. And if you brought Marx back now and showed him welfare state, healthcare, education, and showed him life expectancy in Victorian England was half that it is now in Afghanistan, which has the shortest life expectancy in the world. And Marx would have been astonished by that, and by capitalism's ability to mutate. And the main way it's done that is by incorporating criticisms. It's kept changing to allow for critiques. And so, for instance, the modern welfare state is invented by Otto von Bismarck when he starts creating pensions in Germany in the 19th century. And Bismarck didn't do it because he was a cuddly, nice man who loved the ordinary working person. He did it because they were starting to be worried about organised labour and revolt and dissatisfaction. If you give people pensions, they have more of a stake in the way things run. And and since the crisis, there have been two failures. One's been a failure of a kind of coherent critique from the left, say, look, these are the things that you need to change. These are the rules that we demand in terms of how finance works, how tax works, global corporations, things like that. But the other thing is a failure of capitalism to incorporate some of the criticisms and to allow for the fact that ordinary people are really struggling to have a decent standard of living. Now, that's a historic break inside capitalism. That's one of the things capitalism has consistently succeeded in doing, is doing enough of the things that its critics want. And I think part of and that's in a way where the hope comes from. It's a thing that capitalism has managed to do repeatedly, and it wouldn't be that hard to fix. You just need to prevent this current phenomenon we have of colossal corporations whose relationship is extractive, extracting value from our data and information and not paying any tax on these gigantic profits. Another thing is the phenomenon of the kind of international rich who don't, for tax purposes, don't live anywhere, don't pay tax anywhere. Another thing is preparing for a changing world of work in which, we're quite likely to have to change jobs 2 or 3 times across a career. I think the model of kind of a university as a place where as a sort of ghetto for young people, and then they stop learning things age 22 and they carry on doing the same job for life, that's clearly not viable. And life's also more interesting if it changes, and I think you can sort of get, what we need is a kind of new model for the relationship between the individual, corporations and the state. Because at the moment what happens, the individuals carry all the risk, the corporations take as much money as they can, and the state does a decreasingly good job of providing a safety net and patching up holes. And that three-way relationship needs to be reinvented, needs to be rebalanced, because it's completely skewed. Does that automatically sound completely impossible and utopian? I don't think it is. I think it's perfectly manageable and imaginable. It's just that we're sort of stuck. And this thing about you talking about being 2007, one of the things the feelings I often have talking about economics and things of defence, is the feeling that it is still 2007. I always pick the year 2008, but in a weird way, it's still 2008. And there's the main thing that our societies and cultures need to do is just move on, realise it's not. We have to work on the next thing now.
Sí, però, i acabant amb aquest tema, però simplement trobo que es veure que el fet que cada vegada siguin menys humans, les ciències humanes, totes aquestes ciències de la música, de la filosofia ara s'ha tornat a incorporar a l'educació, però havien tret la filosofia, és com que estan desprestigiades. No sé si tornaran a recuperar aquest prestigi que tenien, com a mínim per entendre l'ésser humà, i llavors sembla moltes vegades que estiguem més pendents de conservar uns privilegis que s'han aconseguit abans que conservar uns drets i unes llibertats que també teníem, i ara ens fa l'efecte una mica, o a mi em fa l'efecte una mica, que els estem anant perdent, no? I estem més preocupats per aquests privilegis que estem perdent que no pas per aquests drets i llibertats que havien aconseguit com a mínim els nostres pares i els nostres avis. No sé si estaria d'acord o no.
I think there is a risk that we're...
O sigui, hem de ser sempre productius, no? I hem d'estar sempre... Som allò que produïm i cada vegada som menys allò que hem estat.
I think that there's a funny thing that's happened over all the great revolutions in production. I think with the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, one of the strange things that happened was that human work became more like machines. If you work in a factory, a 19th century factory, you're in effect a machine. So you had this odd thing that the thing that we created and invented kind of reinvented us. And I think something similar happened with the computer revolution. The computers invented, and then if you look at a modern office, if you were an extraterrestrial who came, it wouldn't entirely be clear who was serving who. Whether the computers are serving the people or the people who are serving the computer. Because, again, the computer changed the nature of work. I notice it when I go to see my doctor, my GP. I've actually started he doesn't know this. I've started timing the amount of the thing he's looking at me compared to the amount of time he's looking at the screen and typing. And it's always about 70%. You know, you're in there for 5 minutes and he's 4 minutes, he's looking at... You know, and I feel my head could be kind of falling off and like green fluid oozing out of my... Yeah, and he wouldn't notice. You know, I could be going like full zombie mode. He says, how are you? You know, blood pressure all right? And so that, you know, so it's happened twice that the Industrial Revolution made us more machine-like and computers have made us more computing-like. And I think that the risk of a sort of algorithmic machine learning AI thing, if you... by extension, that metaphor is it risks us being a kind of mathematical tool or instrument, which, as you say, whose function is just to be kind of constantly productive and as a sort of invisible and inherently not very valuable unit in much more all-embracing, much more important systems. I do think that is a risk. But you know, sometimes you have to take hope from the fact that, you know, things often rebound historically. And I think I'm hopeful you're right, there is a crisis in the humanities, in people seeing the value of them. But I have a friend who's a doctor who says, and his line is that the humanities, he has to be said, he's the only scientist I know who says this, but the humanities are more important than the sciences. And I remember the first time he said that to me, I said, why? And he says, well, because the sciences don't tell you how to live. And the most important question for everybody is how should you live? What should you do? And you have to turn to the humanities for that. And I think that's true. And I think over time, I think we're living in a particular historic moment, but over time, in general, the arts and the humanities have been very important because that's the need that they speak to. People want to know how they should be, how they should live.
Avancis una mica el tema de The Wall, ens ha parlat ara abans, però seria un llibre de ciència-ficció, de ficció, o la ciència-ficció i la ficció són el mateix i en realitat no són més que una manera de parlar de la realitat?
I think all fictions are always about reality in one way or another. And I think it was William Gibson, a great American science fiction writer, said that they're always about things that are happening in the present. And certainly that's my notion of it. I can't talk too much about it because it hasn't come out yet. And it's in a funny way, I always find books are clearer when people have reacted to them. You know, so my sort of own sense of it is slightly blurred in them. I might go back and read it and discover that it's set in a school for wizards. But at the moment, I suppose I think of it as a sort of dream version of where we are. That's my current sense of it. It's a sort of dream alternate reality.
O sigui que al final seria un llibre com tots els altres, d'altra banda, perquè encara que parli de diners i encara que parli d'economia i encara que parli d'aquesta manera que ens afecta a totes les persones, al final és un llibre tan humà com els altres, no? És a dir, que sí que busca aquestes humanitats en la seva manera d'escriure.
But I think one of the things that's unusual about the novel, if you think about the big artistic forms that we've sort of inherited, the novel, symphony, play, poetry, drama, sculpture, all of those things. The novel is the only one that can't be abstract. You know, the novel always has this human mixture. And you can have an abstract sculpture, an abstract poem, an abstract piece of music, abstract piece of art. You can't have an abstract novel. It can't be, it wouldn't exist. So it does have this sort of, and in the same way, I think you can't have a perfect novel. the novel is the artistic form that always has this element of humanness and imperfection and mixedness in it, and that for people who love the novel, that's the reason we love it. It's a thing that you can't get. You can't take the humanity out of a novel.
I per això sempre les novel·les ens pregunten que quant hi ha de veritat, no? I quant hi ha d'autobiogràfic. O sigui, ja no es llegeixen les novel·les com antigament, que eren una cosa separada de la nostra vida pròpia, sinó que sempre les relacionen de qualque manera, sobretot en el cas que se tituli una novel·la familiar.
It is really odd that, because one of the things you notice, I'm sure you've noticed this too, is that people don't believe in the idea of fiction. People just don't believe that you make things up as a writer. People are incredibly reluctant to believe that very, very... And so my first book came out 23 years ago, Debt to Pleasure, and everywhere I went, including here, by the way, so it's a novel about, he's a mad snob, he's a misanthrope, he's obsessed with food, he's mainly psychotic, he's an incredibly horrible person, and in the course of the book, I think he murders, if I'm right in saying, I think he murders 9 people. And the question I was asked, more often than anyone else, everywhere I went, is it autobiographical? And it's because, people just, if you say I made it up, people just don't believe you.
És la gràcia, jo crec, no? Perquè els cantants i els poetes no s'hi pregunten què hi ha d'autobiogràfic a les seves obres. Ja se suposa que és una abstracció de les seves pròpies experiències, o no, o és la seva... No? I a nosaltres sempre ens ho preguntaran, no ens podrem desfer mai més d'aquesta pregunta.
Maybe it's a compliment, though, because I think presumably if it didn't seem real, no one would ask. I hope it's a compliment. It's either a compliment or an insult.
Sí. També és una manera... Ens creiem tot el que està per escrit, no sé per què, encara que ho haguem escrit nosaltres mateixos.
It's true, but I do it to friends. If I read a friend's book, I always assume that, is so-and-so, so-and-so. And there was in my last novel, there's a banker's wife in it who's rather rich and spoiled and obsessed with money and very difficult. And 2 separate friends of mine asked me separately and privately if that character was based on each of their ex-wives.
No, i després hi ha les persones que se senten reflectides en el llibre i s'enfaden amb tu perquè creuen que has estat parlant d'elles i ni tan sols les tenies al cap, no? És a dir, que al final la gent es projecta molt en aquella obra escrita, no? Molt més de... I a més que dius, però si ni tan sols estava pensant en tu, per què creus que estava pensant en tu? O per què te sents identificat amb aquest personatge? I si no, el pare de l'amic del germà... Sempre hi ha algú que... No?
But isn't that partly people like the idea that people, if they, people run away from someone wanting to write about them? That's not true in general. If people run towards a notebook, people like the idea of being in the story and in the book and so on. It's quite, and you notice that if you report things, actually people want to tell their side of events. There's an old trick though. So if you're writing about men, I don't think it works for women. There's a great old English writer, Evelyn Waugh, and he used to put portraits of his friends in his books, and they would often be, drunk, abusive, mad, stupid, bankrupt, these horrible caricatures. And he never lost any friendships because of it. And his biographer eventually asked him, how did you do that? Because you put him in, he's drunk, adulterous, loses all his money, he's smelly, he's a liar, and you put that in his book, everyone can recognize him, and you're still friends. How did you do that? And he said, you can get away with putting any man you know in a book, as long as you say that he's attractive to women. You can have a long list of terrible characteristics, but women like him, and they think, oh, that was great.
Sí, és una bona estratègia. Bueno, doncs moltíssimes gràcies. També sabia que si canvies la professió del personatge, li canvies el nom i la professió, també em sembla que cola. I encara que tota la resta siguin idèntics, diuen que també funciona. Ho dic per si alguna vegada ho necessites.
I might try that, thank you.
Bueno, doncs moltíssimes gràcies, ha estat un plaer i moltíssimes gràcies a tothom per haver vengut.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.